So there's a lot of excitement around the Perodua emo-ii concept, but that was to me not the exciting part about Klims. I was there for half a day, which is why I'm so tired. And the next day I gave my friend some thoughts on the Perodua emo-ii concept, and now I'm going to share those thoughts with you. And I think we don't really do these kind of videos on Autophiles, but maybe a chance to do something new, because this is an automotive news reviews channel that is Malaysian, and the Perodua emo-ii is going to be Malaysia's first official electric vehicle, supposed to be. Proton Emas 7 doesn't count because it is clearly a GD product, and GD clearly is sending the signal that Proton is not as involved as it wants to think that it is. Very interesting there, but that's a different discussion. So my friend was saying, it's pretty exciting or something to that effect, and I was too tired to actually read through his messages, so I just gave him a bunch of voice notes on the way to today's event, which is a Leapmoto C10 drive. I'm going to summarize what I told him in the voice notes. And the first thing I told him was, I don't think that Perodua has that car building experience to be able to build an electric vehicle by themselves. I mean, how many cars have they built by themselves? I think only 2, and even that is not really by themselves. So the 2 cars that I can think of is the Beza, which is based on the Axia and uses Toyota and Daihatsu engineering to a very large extent. So does that really count as their own project? Yeah, because Daihatsu doesn't sell a version of the Beza. So the Beza is Perodua's vehicle. After 22 years of being a car manufacturer, they made their own car. But of course, they have to borrow some technology to make it happen. Then you have the emo-ii, the current generation emo-ii. To be honest, that's also a bit of a stretch, but I would also consider it a Perodua built vehicle, because I don't think Daihatsu has a version of the current emo-ii that is sold as a Daihatsu or a Toyota anywhere else. So I think those are the only 2 Peroduas that are really in-house cars. I could be wrong, so leave it in the comments if I missed anything, any Perodua vehicle that is independently made by them. Please let me know. So judging by their experience in car building, it's not very extensive, because those 2 vehicles that I mentioned are still using Daihatsu and Toyota parts, chassis engineering, stuff like that. And the fact that they are not selling these vehicles in developed countries where there are very stringent regulations and very tough competition indicates to me that it might not be the most competitive thing in an open environment. You still get some sales in smaller countries like Sri Lanka and all that. The car is doing well, the Beza is doing okay, but yeah, that's a different matter. The point is this: to go from borrowing technology to build something like the Beza to suddenly being able to build an EV without any help from Toyota or Daihatsu is, not to say an impossibility, but to do that in 1 year is highly improbable. So to me, the worst case scenario is this: the government or somebody, some agency in the government gives Perodua funding to pursue this project independent of their technical partners in Daihatsu and Toyota by extension. That means Perodua says, okay, I will build this electric car by myself, and I will do it in record time, and it will not be using Toyota or Daihatsu technology to a large extent. Maybe the chassis they can borrow, but there'll be a lot of funding just coming from the government. That would mean we're back in the 1990s, 1980s Proton situation, where Malaysian taxpayer money is used to spur the local automotive scene to the detriment of the Malaysian customer ultimately. I think Perodua won't do as bad a job as Proton did in the 80s and 90s, which ultimately led to its own partial sale to Geely. So I don't think that will happen to Perodua going down this route, because they are far more financially prudent than Proton ever was. But I still don't think it's a good idea. Even as earnest an effort as they may put into it, I don't think ultimately it'll pay off, unless Toyota and Daihatsu say, you know what, you guys go and do the work. Because you are not directly a Japanese company, you have easier inroads to work with Chinese players like CATL or any other battery manufacturer, electric motor manufacturer. So maybe best case scenario also it plays out this way, and then Toyota says, okay, with whatever technology Perodua develops, they pay Perodua to license that to create a really cheap electric vehicle that they can sell in developing markets for themselves. But I don't think this is a realistic scenario, because I don't think I've seen this kind of thing play out from what I can tell in the automotive industry. Usually doesn't happen this way. Usually they just buy up some startup who already has some EV technology, like what happened with Rimac, or they partner up with some bigger entity that already has some electric vehicle technology, like this Leapmotor and Stellantis nonsense. So not really nonsense, but yeah. I shouldn't say that because they're paying for my room. I'm actually in a pretty nice room right now. So that's the one pretty bleak scenario which could possibly play out, and it is bad, I think, because we will be paying for it, taxpayers will be paying for it, to fund, to research and to develop this. And Perodua may not as a business have its heart fully in it, because they may look at it and say, I'm already selling 300,000 Bezas or Bezas and Myvis, whatever their number is, and it doesn't cost me any R&D to keep doing this and keep making money off of doing this. But what you are asking me to do, Mr. Government, is to spend a lot of R&D money to build a car that I can only sell 500 of. And as a business, they might look at the government and say, okay, well then you give me the R&D money. And that is how Proton was kept alive throughout the 90s and 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't want that scenario to play out with Perodua, and it's a very bleak scenario, if I'm being honest. So then what is the other outcome? Now, the slightly more optimistic and realistic outcome, I think, is that they get some synergies going between Daihatsu and Suzuki, because if I'm not mistaken, Daihatsu and Suzuki in Japan are pretty bitter rivals. In some towns you can see ads of one car on one pillar, and then ads of a rival car from the other brand on the other pillar. So I don't think Daihatsu and Suzuki like each other very much, and in the grand scheme of things, they kind of have the world divided up between the two of them. So you've got India dominated by Suzuki, and you have Southeast Asia kind of dominated by Daihatsu via Perodua to some extent. But recently, when Suzuki launched the e-Vitara, they got some help from Toyota, and in the agreement, some MOU or something that was released during the e-Vitara launch, we got to see a little bit of synergies already forming in that MOU that names both Daihatsu and Suzuki and Toyota in that same thing, showing that there will be some technology transfer between these three companies. And we already know that Toyota also has some developing and existing relationship with BYD in relation to electric vehicles. So the optimistic and realistic scenario that I see potentially unfolding is, through BYD's technology, Toyota shares some of this with Daihatsu and Suzuki, and perhaps Suzuki already has done the work because there is an e-Vitara that's ready for production that uses some of Toyota's technology. And so we have some technological transfer that goes that way through Daihatsu into a smaller Perodua. So imagine a Perodua Activa-esque vehicle with Suzuki e-Vitara internals, I guess. That sort of scenario I can see happening, and you might ask, well, how is it going to happen in 1 year? Because the deadline that the government seems to have in mind is the end of 2025 for a sub 100,000 ringgit car that is electric and viable. Well, I think they might be able to pull it off, because we have kind of seen it be pulled off before with the Perodua Activa. The Activa was not even a Daihatsu Rocky, until, if I'm not mistaken, the end of 2019. We went for the Tokyo Motor Show in 2019, and they revealed the Daihatsu Rocky there. And then by 2021 or 2020, the Perodua Activa was already kind of like ready for production in Malaysia. So that 1 year gap, very accelerated, but I think they were responding to the X50 and some other changes in the landscape. So I think it is possible for Perodua, Daihatsu and Toyota to make the synergies work in a reasonable amount of time. Maybe they will show the car by the end of 2025 and then prepare it for production for 2026. We shall see, but that is my optimistic and realistic scenario for this Malaysian EV by Perodua. And then you have the other slightly very optimistic but highly unrealistic scenario, which is Daihatsu gives Perodua a bit of free rein to go and court a different technical partner, specifically for this EV project. So this is a scenario that I think is highly unlikely, but you know, if it does happen, I think that is the shortcut that Perodua might be forced to take, because what they might be able to do is they go to a player like Wuling in China. Wuling sells some pretty cheap EVs that are functional and they are viable. They're not just cheap EVs that are there to collect some carbon credits or anything like that. They do have some pretty usable small cheap EVs, and they bring in one of these small EVs to rebadge as a Perodua for one model, with the condition that they get the blueprints and they get to reverse engineer some of the technical aspects of it to further develop the technology on their own for future models. But this is why I think it's the most optimistic scenario, because I think the second scenario, the one where they take the Suzuki tech, will result in a vehicle that is not very competitive. I think if the Japanese create an EV that is cheap, below 100,000, using this technology that they currently are going to share, it'll end up being a car that feels like it's 50,000 ringgit in terms of the interior and the build quality and all that, and probably has the range of a 50-60,000 ringgit electric vehicle, but it would cost close to 100,000, probably 90,000 ringgit. And if that's the scenario, then Perodua's target of selling 500 vehicles in 1 year is probably going to be realistic or pretty optimistic. So I don't want the second scenario to play out, even though it's very realistic, because it's just going to end up being a box, an electric box that is overpriced. And the way China is signaling us is by showing that, hey, look, there's an Ion Y Plus and an Ion ES that are decent. They're just over 100,000, and if you didn't have an artificial barrier, they would be much cheaper than that. Even the Proton Ilmas 7, the Galaxy E5 that it's based on, is being sold for something like 70,000 ringgit in China. So yeah, I don't want our market to be kind of artificially stopped, the progress, you know, in the automotive space to be stopped because the government is saying we need to have a 100,000 ringgit protective barrier for Perodua to sell a subpar EV that nobody wants to buy. So yes, the most optimistic scenario is that Perodua changes with the times and temporarily or maybe permanently gets another technical partner from China to produce a respectable EV at 60 to 70,000 ringgit that people actually want to buy, and is not a drain on resources, because I think some EVs are a drain on resources. You don't need so many EVs to flood the market, and within a few years we'll start to see some brands give up on EVs, and within a few years we'll start to see some brands disappear altogether because they committed to EVs but they didn't make good enough EVs to last because they were not desirable. And if we go by the most realistic scenario, I think we're going to end up with Perodua making an EV that is not desirable. So yeah, that is why I'm not optimistic or enthusiastic about the Perodua, what's it called, emo-ii concept. And yeah, apparently during the demo, the car didn't even roll out into the stage properly. It stopped after 30 seconds and had to be restarted, and then it came up onto the scene. So that's that. Thanks for watching.